Welcome to Lesson 1. This video will cover the basic things that you need to know about Bubble. And after this lesson, you'll be familiar with the most important concepts that every Bubble user should know. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's now talk about the Design tab. So this is where you create the user interface of your application. And you can do that by adding different types of design elements onto your page. And such elements include visual elements, containers, input forms, reusable elements, as well as element templates. And with each element that you add on the page, you have the ability to control how it looks and how it works. For example, let's add the shape element on the screen. After we've added the shape, you can see that this pop-up shows up. And this pop-up is called the property editor. And the property editor allows us to control different things about the element, such as the appearance, the layout, and it also allows us to add conditions to this element. And within the property editor, we have something called the element inspector. And you can open the element inspector by clicking on this icon here. So the element inspector basically allows us to see the custom states, events, actions, and other elements that are associated with this element. And if we had events, actions, and other elements that are associated with this element, then we would be able to see them listed here. For example, let's add an event to this shape to see how it will be listed here. So we can go to appearance and then we can say start or edit workflow. And within this event, we can just say that when shape A is clicked, we want to hide this shape. And if we go to the element inspector, we can see that our event has been added here, which says shape A is clicked. And when we click on this event, it'll take us to the workflow tab and we will see this event listed here. So that's how the element inspector and the property editor works. Next, we want to talk about the elements tree. So the elements tree allows us to see at a glance all the elements that have been added on the page. And we can also see nested elements. But what do we mean by that? Well, let's add, for example, a group. And you'll see that this group is called group A. So we'll just change its color. And then we'll add another group, but we'll add this group within group A. And this one is automatically called group B. So we'll change its color again. And then we'll add another group within group B. And this one is called group C. Then we'll also change its color to red. So we can see that we have groups that have been placed inside of group A. And the elements tree allows us to see every element that has been placed on the page. So if we would like to see elements that are nested within group A, we can simply click on the plus button here. And then we'll see that group B will be shown. And we can click on group B to see additional nested elements. And we can see that group C is shown. So we can see that the elements tree really allows us to see elements regardless of how deeply nested they are. And the elements tree also allows us to hide or show different elements on the page. For example, we can click the eye icon to hide group C. And you can see that group C has been hidden from view. And we can also hide group B, and you'll see that it has also been hidden. And when we hide the main parent group, we can see that all these elements have been hidden. Another thing that we'd like to talk about are the native hints that Bubble gives us, especially if there's an error within our application. So let's say that we want to add a condition that when group C is clicked, we want to change its color. So let's try to add a condition, and then we click on this group. But instead of continuing to define this condition, let's say for some reason we forget to define this condition in whole, and then we exit the property editor. Because we didn't complete our condition in the right way, we see that there's an issue here. And this is a native hint that Bubble gives us. It states that group C must evaluate to yes or no, but this is an element. So we can actually click on this issue to take us where we need to go. So when we click on it, we are shown the property editor of group C where the error has occurred. So now when we complete this condition in the right way, you'll notice that our error will disappear. And just to explain what this error means, it basically says that a condition must always say yes or no. And this basically means that a condition must be true or false. But currently, our statement here does not evaluate to a true or false condition. It simply talks about the group. So we can finish it by saying when this group is pressed, then we can go ahead to change a certain property of this element. So we can say we want the background color to change to white. So now our error has disappeared because we have fixed our issue. So this statement here now evaluates to yes or no, or true or false. So this element can either be false or true, and if it is true, then our background color will change. So that's basically how native bubble hints work. They are there to help us fix any problems within our application. And there are two additional points that we would like to highlight with regards to the property editor. Firstly, we'd like to highlight that the property editor allows you to edit the width and height of an element. And the width is basically how wide an element is, and of course the height property controls the height of the element. And you can control the width and height by simply editing them within the property editor here or here. And there's also a checkbox that can make this element to have a fixed width. And as the name suggests, a fixed width basically means that the width of the element will not increase or decrease when the page resizes. So for example, the width of this element is 253 pixels. So if this checkbox is checked, this means that this element will always be this wide. And when you hover on the element, you can see that indeed our height and width are exactly as we have specified them within the property editor. The second thing that we'd like to highlight is that the property editor allows you to check the documentation of a certain thing. For example, we can see that for the text element, we have the option to use the rich text editor. But say you'd like to have more information about the rich text editor. All you have to do is simply hover on this, and you can see that we are given a C reference link. And when we click on that link, we are redirected to Bubble's documentation. And we'll be taken to the exact location within the documentation that talks about the certain thing that we wanted to check. And as you can see, we have been taken to the text portion of the documentation that talks about the rich text editor. So if at any point you'd like to see more information about a certain thing, you can simply hover on it and you can click on the C reference link, which will take you to the documentation. And this works with other things. For example, you can hover on this and you will see the C reference link. You can also hover on this and you'll also be able to see the C reference link. A similar feature is available with plugins. For example, I have a Zeroqode plugin installed within this application, and this uploader element is the element of this plugin. And when I place it on the page, the property editor shows up. And you can see that we have this text that says show documentation. When we click on that, we're given more information about the certain thing that we wanted to check. So the next time you want to know more information about a certain thing, you can always click the C reference link or click on show documentation to see more info. So I'll now be showing you how to preview a page. So in Bubble, we have the ability to see how the app will look like in real life. And we can do that by clicking on this button that says preview. And when we click this button, we are given a new window that will show how our page will look like to an actual user. So currently right now we see a text in the middle of the page that says index page. And that's because I have placed a text element in the middle of the page that says index page. But sometimes you could be building a page that's only available to users who are logged in. So currently this page is visible whether or not we are logged in. But let's say that you are building a profile page for an app. Normally that profile page will show information of a user that's logged in. So let's see a simple example of that. So I'm currently in a new page which I have named profile page. And in the center, I have placed a text element that basically contains both the name and the surname of the current user. And this means that this text element will show the information that's received from the database of the current user who's logged in. But what if a user is not logged in but tries to access this page? Well, let's click to preview to see what happens. As you can see, nothing is shown on the page, and that's because we are currently not logged in as a user. So how can we log in as a user while we are building our app? So an easy way to do this is to basically go to the Data tab, and then go to App Data, and then go to the user's data type, and then you can log in as any user within your database. And if you don't currently have a user within your database, then you can add a test user by clicking on New Entry, and then entering the name and email of this user. So once you're here, you can log in as any user by clicking this button that says Run As. And this option will let us log in as the user that we have selected. So let's currently log in as this user who's named Jack Hammer. So we'll log in by clicking Run As. So now we have the name of the current user who's logged in shown on the page. So that's the difference between viewing a page as a logged in user and viewing a page without being logged in. So it's a good thing to remember that every time you're building a page that has information of the current user, you'll have to log in as a user in order to see that information displayed when you try to preview the page. So we now want to talk about the debugger. So Bubble has a feature that allows us to test and debug our application. And the debugger can always be accessed when you preview a page. And on the preview page, the debugger will be placed at the bottom. And here we can see that we are given three options, which are normal, slow, and step-by-step. And these options allow us to control the speed of our workflows. For example, if the debugger is set to normal, then that means our workflows will run at a normal speed, which will be at the same speed as a live application. Next, we can set the workflows to run at a slower speed. So this will allow our workflows to execute, but with a very small pause in between. Finally, we can set the speed to step-by-step. And this action allows us to run our workflows manually step by step. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. So let's see how this demo app will work when our debugger is set to different speeds. This demo app is basically a to-do list. So a user can simply type in the task name and then add the task and it will appear in the list. So with our debugger set to normal, we can add a task that says wash the car. And when we add this task, we can see that our app ran at a normal speed. And that's how an actual user would interact with your application. But what happens when the debugger is set at a slower speed? So we can select the slow speed and then add an example task like cook a meal. And when we click the add button, we can see that the workflows are being executed slowly, with a small pause in between each step. So the slow speed allows us to see our workflows being executed at a glance. But there's also an option to execute workflows step by step. So let's see how this will work. So we can add another example task like buy food. And now we can see that we are given the ability to manually execute this workflow step by step. And we can do that by clicking Run Next. And when we click Run Next, we can see that the next action is being executed, which creates a new task. And the task name is buy food, which is the name that has been inserted within our input field. And when we click Run Next, we can see that we are resetting the relevant inputs. So that's basically how the debugger speeds work. And the step-by-step speed is especially helpful when you want to carefully observe what's happening with your workflows. Another thing that we can do with the debugger is to inspect different elements that have been placed on the page. And we can inspect them by clicking on the Inspect button. After that, we can hover on any element on the page and we can inspect it by clicking on the element. So when we click on this element, we can see that its properties are being displayed. So the inspector basically allows us to see the different properties of each element. And we are able to see its custom states, its conditions, and even things like the font size, as well as the placeholder color. Also, we can search for elements on the page by clicking on this drop-down button, and we can actually type in the name of the element. For example, let's say we want to inspect the add button. So we can say add. And when we click on this entry, we can see that the properties of the add button have been displayed. So in a nutshell, that's basically how the debugger works. And it allows us to debug, test, and inspect our app for us to know exactly what's happening with our Bubble application. So now we'd like to talk about version control. So we can access our version control settings by clicking on this drop-down here. And this drop-down allows us to do different things. For example, we can create a save point, which I'll explain in a moment. And then we can also deploy the current version to live. And then we also have the options to see the development history of our application. So this pop-up allows us to revert back to a previous point in time of our application, and we can simply enter the date and time that we'd like to revert back to. Additionally, we can also revert to a previous save point, and we don't have a save point here because we haven't yet added one. So you can click here to create a save point. And this basically allows you to save the current active version of your application to your development history. For example, we can create a save point that says version 1, and we can click save. So when we try to go back to our history, we can see that we have the version 1 save point, and we can revert back to this version or the save point by clicking this button. Lastly, as mentioned before, you have the ability to deploy the current version to live. So if you're happy with the current state of your app and you'd like to make it available to live users, you can deploy the current version to live by clicking this button. But do know that it's best to deploy your current version to live when you don't have any listed issues here. So you'll first want to fix any issues before you want to deploy the current version to live users. So let's now talk about the workflow tab. So the workflow tab is where you basically add instructions as to how you want your app to work. For example, if you want a user to log in by clicking a login button, then you do that within the workflow tab. And each instruction that you add to your app is made up of events as well as actions. For example, we can see here that it says click here to add an event. So let's see a simple example of how to log out a user. So we can go back to the design tab, and then on the name that we had on our profile page, we can say that when this text element is clicked, we want to log out the user. So we can click this button that says start or edit workflow, and it'll take us directly to the workflow tab. So the square boxes within the workflow tab are called events, and each event is made up of an action. And an event is executed when something else happens. For example, in our case, when the text that we added on our page is clicked on, we want to add an action that logs out the user. So we can click here to add an action. And the action that we want is found under account, and then we can go to the one that says log the user out. And just like that, the user will be logged out from the app. So we can see to preview how this will work. So we're currently logged in as Jack Hammer. So we expect that when we click on the name, we want Jack Hammer to be logged out since that's the instruction that we added within the workflow tab. So let's click here to see what happens. So now the profile name of the user has disappeared, which means that we're currently logged out from the app. So that's basically how the workflow tab works. So to recap, this is where you add instructions of how you want your app to function. And these instructions are made up of events and actions. And if you'd like to get more information about workflows, you can read the Bubble docs by going to manual.bubble.io. And here you can click on this tab that says Building Workflows, and it'll give you more information about how to build workflows within your Bubble app. So we'd now like to talk about the Data tab. So the Data tab is where you configure your app's database. And the database is where all the information that's related to your app is stored. But it's important to know that there are different versions of your database. For example, there's a live database and there's a development database. By default, when you open your Bubble editor, you are always in the development environment. So this is where you are free to insert dummy data into your database. For example, here we have sample users within our database. These are not actual users, but these are dummy users that we have inserted just to test out our database. But the data that's within our live app will be different because that data will contain actual information of actual users. So that's why we have the option to switch to a live database. And when we are within a live database, we can switch back to a development database. So think of your development database as where you are free to test different things. But the live database is not where you want to test things because it contains actual information of real users. But we also have the option to copy and restore a database. And this allows us to execute two main operations. First, we can copy live data into the development database, or we can copy development data into the live database. So let's talk about the first one, copying live data into the development database. So you would execute this operation if you'd like to have a copy of the live data within your development database. Then second, we can copy development data into the live database. So you execute this operation, especially if you want the development data to be the same as the live database. But we are given the notice here that copying data between development and live versions is a dangerous operation, as it will entirely override your existing database. In particular, if you copy from development to live data will be lost. So you need to be careful when you're executing these operations. And each time that you'd like to read data from your app's UI, it's important to always set the data source correctly. But what am I referring to when talking about the data source? Well, let's go to the Design tab. And here you can see that I have added a repeating group, which is basically a list of things. And here I would like to show a list of users that's within our database. And when I click on this repeating group, the property editor comes up. And as you can see, the type of content is set to user because we want to show a list of users within this repeating group. And we have set up the data source to search for users. So this means that this repeating group will search for all the users that are within our database. So we can click to preview to see our list of users. And we can see that our list of users appear as we expect. And all these users are the users that have been defined within our database inside the users data type. But what happens if we don't set the data source correctly? For example, let's say we have this field empty, and then we try to preview our app. As you can see, the users don't appear at all within our list because our data source is not set up correctly. But if we say again, do a search for users within our database, then all our users will appear as we expect. So this goes to show that it's very important to always set up your data source correctly. I'll now show you how to install a plugin. Plugins allow you to add additional features to your Bubble app, and I'll now show you an example of how to add a premium plugin called the Stripe Marketplace Express plugin. So the Stripe Marketplace Express plugin can be found in different ways. We will first see how to find it on Bubble, and then we will see how to find it on the Zeroqode website. So on the plugins page of the Bubble website, on the community created plugins, you can search for the plugin by typing in Stripe or Stripe Marketplace. Then select the plugin that says Stripe Marketplace Express. Afterwards, you'll be redirected to this page where you can find more information about the plugin. You can also find different links to the demo and documentation pages. There's also a link to the Zeroqode forum if you need any help or have any questions about the plugin. And on this drop-down right here, you can select the app in which you'd like to install the plugin through the Bubble editor. But before we demonstrate how to do that, let's see how we can find the plugin on the Zeroqode website. So to get to the Zeroqode website, simply head over to zeroqode.com. Then to get to the plugins page, you can hover your mouse on the Build menu tab. Then select the menu link that says Plugins. So on this page, you can type in the word Stripe or Stripe Marketplace within the search box. Then after clicking on the correct plugin, you'll be redirected to the Zeroqode's plugin page. Here, you can read more about the plugin and you can also read on some frequently asked questions. You also have the option to see the live demo or the demo editor of the Stripe Marketplace Express plugin. And upon clicking the button that says Buy Plugin, you'll see a pop-up that shows a couple of steps which outline how to purchase the plugin through the Bubble editor. It's important to note that you can purchase plugins only through the Bubble editor. And the steps that you see here are the steps that we'll be demonstrating now. So to purchase and install the plugin, head over to your Bubble app. Then click on the Plugins tab. Afterwards, click on the button that says Add Plugins. And on this pop-up, you can type in Stripe or Stripe Marketplace. Then on the result that says Stripe Marketplace Express, you can click on the Buy button to purchase and install the plugin. And that's the general process of installing a plugin. So let's now talk about the Settings tab. So within the Settings tab, you have a lot of options that allow you to configure your application. Within the app plan, this is where you can choose which plan your app will run on, and you can also purchase capacity boosts if you wish to do so. In the General tab, you have a lot of options that you can configure. For example, you may change the favicon. So the favicon refers to the image that shows on the browser tab. Another thing that you can change is the color of the progress bar. So the progress bar is the bar that shows on top when the app is loading. So by default, it's this color here, but you can change it to any brand color that you wish. You can also change the color of the repeating group spinner. So the repeating group spinner is the spinner that shows when a repeating group is busy trying to read data from the database. And you can change the color of that spinner by defining a new color here. And here's an example of how the spinner looks using the default gray color. And this is how it looks in a different color. Another thing that's commonly changed is the color palette. So by default, we are given these colors, but you can change them. And these colors appear on the property editor when you are changing the color of an element. So these are the colors that have been defined within our color palette. Next, you can also change the domain or email of your application. So if you'd like to link your application to a custom domain, you can set that here. And after you've added a domain, you can also set up your email settings. And then within the Languages tab, this is where you can change the application primary language. And you can also change other things. For example, we have an alert that says when two passwords don't match, this is the default alert that will be shown. But you can change this text to something else. Next, we have the SEO or meta tags tab. And this is where we can set the title of application, the site name, as well as the description. And you can also change the thumbnail that is used for links. Next, we have the API tab. And this tab allows us to enable API endpoints as well as backend workflows within our application. So if you will use backend workflows or APIs, this is where you configure those settings. And API calls are a way to exchange data with external services, and you can use them to trigger some action on the service's end. For example, you can trigger an action that creates a new entry in the database. You can send an email and so on. This all depends on your needs. And you may need to use the API connector plugin to connect with other external services using API calls. And there are a lot of resources online that can help you with regards to using Bubble API calls. And you can read about them on the Bubble docs by going to manual.bubble.io and clicking on the tab that says Using the Bubble API. Within the Collaboration tab, this is where you can collaborate with other Bubble users and control what access they have. Then within the Next tab, this is where you can add sub-applications of your Bubble app. So these are basically copies or duplicates of your main Bubble application. And a sub-application can be accessed using a subdomain. For example, if your main website is app.com, then a sub-app can be accessed using a subdomain like sub.app.com. Then lastly, we have the Versions tab. And this is where you can control which Bubble version your app is running on. But it's important to be aware that some features are only available on certain Bubble plans. For example, here on the Versions tab, we are shown this notice that scheduled releases can be used on certain higher plans. Please click here for the App Plan tab to upgrade. And on the Sub-Apps tab, we're also given this notice that says sub-applications can be used once the app is on a production plan. And then with regards to SEO or meta tags, we are given this notice that says SEO and social meta tags optimization is only possible on a paid plan. So if you'd like to get more information with regards to Bubble plans, you can go to bubble.io/pricing and you'll be able to read more information about Bubble plans and their specific features. And that's the end of this lesson. And in the next video, we'll dive deeper into the Design tab to help you gain a better understanding of how to design apps in Bubble. So thank you so much for watching this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.